Warm welcome to everyone who's come to this session, Financing Urban Adaptation and Resilience, Innovative Financing Models and Notes from the Field. Um, Thank you to the speakers, especially given the weather challenges that we were facing, and thanks for finally making it, and of course the audience as well. I would like to thank at the outset my colleague Nikhil John, who's the climate finance head within the cities program at WRN India, who guided and supported Karthikeya and myself in organizing this session. But unfortunately, he's not able to make it to the session, and he had one-on-one conversation with most of you before the session. So yes, and of course, thank you, Arun, for stepping in, Program Director, Climate Finance at WR India, to do the moderation. So to start with, I'll just hand over to Jaya Dindor, who's the Executive Program Director, Sustainable Cities at WRI India, for the context setting and introduction.
Thank you very much, Harshil. And like Harshil said, thank you all for being here despite weather and all kinds of challenges. I would first actually like to start with a quick round of introductions of everyone who's present here and then sort of jump into the context. Arun, we could start from you, or actually Karthikeya.
Thank you, Jaya. Good morning, everyone. It's great to have everyone here. My name is Karthikeya Sharma. I work as a Senior Program Associate Climate Finance here at WRI. I've been with the organization for about a year and looking forward to a very incredible session. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Arun Krishnan. I'm the Program Director for Climate Finance. Look at sustainable cities, transport, as well as agriculture.
Hi everyone, I'm Agni. I work as a program manager with the urban development team. Thanks.
Hi everyone, I'm Nilesh Rajadhyaksha. I work at the National Institute of Urban Affairs and I lead the climate projects preparation facility that's being set up at NI. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Dulari. I'm from Yuva, Youth for Unity and Voluntary Action, and I lead the climate justice work at Yuva.
Oh, that's okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Aarti. I'm one of the co-founders at Farmers for Forests. We work with farmers and indigenous communities to protect and restore biodiverse green cover. Thanks.
Morning, everyone. Happy to be here. I'm Sudha. I'm a civil servant working with the Planning Commission, Tamil Nadu, and we work with the urban team of WRI and so many other teams of WRI. I'm happy to be here today and looking forward.
Good morning. I'm Lila Surratt, and I'm with WRI in our global office in Washington, D.C., and I lead our strategic partnerships. Very happy to be part of this conversation.
Yep.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Myself, Dini. I'm currently with a new venture called Livable Accelerator, which works on sustainability solutions at a neighborhood scale based in Bangalore. I also advise Wipro Foundation on ESG and CSR. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Swati Pillai. I'm from the Climate and the Environment team at the World Bank, based out of New Delhi. And I'm also an ex-WRI. So really happy to be back with the team here. Thank you for having me.
Good morning, and sorry I was a few minutes late. My name is Karthik, and I work at a firm called Desai and Associates, which does innovative finance advisory, which includes blended finance, outcomes finance, impact investment, and ESG across the spectrum with foundations, funds, as well as with governments.
Thanks. Hi everyone. I'm Anant. I'm a part of KM Dastur's Climate Risk Adaptation and Insurance vertical. I'm based out of New Delhi, and we are heavily invested in designing climate risk insurance and climate risk finance solutions, especially for the vulnerable communities. Very happy to be here. Thank you.
Hi everyone. I'm Rakshada. I'm from WRI. I'm leading the project. I'm the project lead for Adaptation, Resilience and Finance, and currently working on the project preparation facilities for 4 cities. And yeah, so I'm looking forward to this event. Thank you.
All right, no, thank you all for the introductions. Again, very glad to have you here. I think I'll just start with a quick note on, why this whole financing urban adaptation and resilience. We've been talking about it for a number of years. It continues to remain a very important topic, something which we haven't kind of got our arms around very well. And the reasons are probably because, climate impacts on people and ecosystems that we are seeing are more widespread and severe than anyone expected, quite honestly. And future risks are only going to escalate manyfold with every fraction of degree increase. So this topic is going to be very relevant. One of the major reasons is that there is a massive disparity between the levels of adaptation today and those that are needed, with finance being a very big bottleneck, both its quantity, the quality, and access to it. And there are lots of numbers that you'll see floating around about the amounts that we need for adaptation annually. It's about 3.4 billion every year till 2030. There are numbers which say some 2.8 trillion till 2025, which is the current year. But the fact of the matter is that we need significant investments, and the only investments currently that are flowing into this are largely, they are largely sort of lower than the required flows, and they're coming mostly from the government sector. A large part of what we are trying to understand is how we can increase these flows from the private sector. And there are many sort of barriers to sustainable financing. My colleagues will get into it, starting from sort of, ULB capacity to raise and spend the money, looking at, poor investability of projects, regulatory mechanisms, lack of narrative for the global majority, that we haven't been able to create enough sort of pressures at global and national forums for the need for it. And when we look at the source of adaptation again in India, it's coming from domestic sources which are very heavily constrained. And climate dedicated funds, central governments, state governments have all been trying to do their bits, but a large part of our people, our infrastructure need climate proofing, and that amount is just not there right now. So the discussion today is largely going to be highlighting cases where innovative financing was applied to ANR actions across diverse geographies in India, and to learn about what were the barriers, what were the enabling conditions, and what can we do to make sure that these kind of actions and these models can scale at speed, because that is what we really need. We are in the middle of this climate emergency. And that is going to be large parts of the dialogue here. I'm very happy to have some of the folks here who have been working on this and have seen sort of, success in the work that they are doing. So with this, I would like to hand it over to my colleague Harshil again to take this forward. Once again, thank you all for being here, and we wish us all a very productive discussion. Over to you, Harshil.
Thank you, Jaya. Thanks for setting the context. The objective really is to deep dive into 4 financing models that we'll be showcasing. We'll discuss what aspects of these financing models has worked, has not worked, what are the barriers and enabling conditions for such models to replicate and scale across urban India. So that's really the objective of this session. This is just the agenda. We'll have about close to 55 minutes of roundtable discussion, and then we'll have 5 minutes of closing remarks. We've already done the introduction, so just skipping to the next slide. Also using this platform to just introduce about the climate project preparation facility, which Nilesh is heading at the NIUA. Basically, it's a one-of-a-kind facility that supports cities to develop bankable climate projects, including urban adaptation and mitigation. WR India is a partner to that facility to support on urban adaptation projects, and ICLAI is the partner to the facility to support on urban mitigation projects. The objective of the facility is to really help open up the market for critical infrastructure projects that are considered risky, non-bankable, and untenable for private investment. As part of the mitigation projects, NIUA, in partnership with ICLAI, is supporting Warangal in Telangana in establishing a biomethanization plant. And as part of the adaptation projects, WR India is supporting 4 different cities with project preparation of varied adaptation interventions. More details will be shared in the coming slides. This is basically like a operational sort of diagram of how the CPPF works. The cities basically submit proposal to the facility screens these proposals, selects projects that needs preparation support, bringing them to bankability. So this basically offers a project pipeline for investors and funders to invest in, and also helps ULBs leverage private financing for these projects. Um, some of the services offered by the facility is technical and transaction advisory for the entire project development spectrum. Um, and over time, the facility also plans to build the capacity among state and city level stakeholders to design and implement both mitigation and adaptation projects. However, the CPPF, the facility, will not directly fund any project implementation per se. So just quickly taking you through the 4 adaptation projects that WR India is supporting the facility on. One is an ecological rejuvenation of 10-kilometer stretch of Nandini River in Nashik, basically towards water quality improvement, flood reduction, and restoration of the riparian buffers. The other is a rejuvenation of Gobalala Lake and the traditional stormwater drainage channels, which are called Raja Kaluves, within the Bomanahalli zone in Bangalore to enhance water security, biodiversity, and community well-being. The third project is based in Odisha, so in Indore, alongside the Sirpur Lake, which is a Ramsar site, basically developing a 10-hectare zone with dense forest cover and sponge park infra to improve air quality and enhance urban biodiversity. And then lastly, the project based in Odisha is looking at sustainable and community-centric rejuvenation and eco-tourism master plan development for Rani Band pond and the area around it. So coming to the financing models that I was referring to, the first model is based in Tamil Nadu in the Gulf of Mannar region in Thoothukudi. It focuses on management and rehabilitation of coastal habitats and biodiversity. That was done, which also included seagrass and coral reef restoration, amongst multiple other interventions. The interventions were primarily funded through pool of domestic and international public financing, including National Adaptation Fund, Coastal Regulation Zone Funds at Center. Then you also had State Forest Department pitching in and international public grants from GIZ and IUCN. Some of the successful outcomes involved reduced coastal erosion, enhancing fish biodiversity and coral density, and ultimately improving livelihoods for the fishermen. The second model is based on crowdfunding campaign taken up by Yuva. This campaign was called Chalo Basti Badle, which was a 2-part crowdfunding series for expanding urban greening interventions across multiple vulnerable neighborhoods in Mumbai. The impetus behind this intervention really came from the Caterpillar Foundation philanthropic grant that focused on one vulnerable neighborhood, which is a resettlement colony called Lalubai Compound in the eastern peripheries of Mumbai. And from there on, the crowdfunding series was added as a layer to sort of expand into other vulnerable neighborhoods. And then another offshoot from this, from this project was also Wipro Foundation stepping in to fund a DPR, detailed project report, for a sponge infrastructure within this resettlement colony as well. So more details of this also will be discussed. I'll hand over to my colleague Karthike to discuss about the rest of the 2 financial models.
Thank you, Harshal. So we'll move on to the next model, which was has been curated by Farmers for Forests, around how payment for ecosystem services and carbon credits had helped in land restoration and development of agroforestry and land amongst farmers in the rural areas of Maharashtra. So how this model really works is the organization actually funds the input costs for farmers, and the farmers pay about 10% of the cost around fertilizers for saplings and seeds. And post that, the farmers receive support in the form of the revenue generated from carbon credits, about 20%. And the activities that have come together through this model and through this process, what Farmers for Forests is doing in Maharashtra, they've successfully been able to increase the per acre cost and the revenues that generated from farmers by 3 to 4 times, as opposed to the monoculture activities that were doing previously. And they were also able to reduce their input costs, which is one of the most highest costs which farmers pay to get these activities by 70%. And Aarti will be able to expand on this model, but this is something that we've seen and we would really like to showcase because there's a curation of payment for ecosystem services and carbon credits, two models coming together and benefiting farmers in the rural areas. So the next one is very interesting. This is something that has recently come up in India as well. It's a parametric insurance model, and this is a case study from Quintana Roo in Mexico, and how the tourism facilities in the region, the businesses, they came together to pay for a premium for restoring the land area for restoration in case a hurricane comes in the region. So the businesses, uh, the government in the region, and the landowners, they came together, they paid a fee to restore that area. And the trigger point for that hurricane happened in 2020, and about 800,000 US dollars was released, which actually helped in the restoration of the beaches, and the debris were cleared, which actually proves that in cases of very violent hurricanes or disastrous regions, we can see the insurance model coming together. And this is something that we've seen earlier this year in Nagaland as well, and Anand will be able to highlight that later in his conversation. So before we get into the aspect of the conference, we would also like to launch a conference proceeding of an activity that WRI undertook earlier this year. It was a CSR convening on how CSR aligns with the Bengaluru Climate Action Plan and Resilience. This was done in partnership with the Climate Action Cell of Bangalore, with WRI and Satwa Consulting. And about 50 attendees came together from officials, from corporates, and from CSR organizations. And they really brainstormed around how we can best align CSR outcomes with the Bangalore Climate Action Plan, which actually WRI worked with the Bangalore Mahanagarpalika and C40 to launch in 2023. So you can scan the QR code, I can see some of the outcomes of the discussions that we had and how we can best align these activities and enhance the aspect of climate action for the city of Bangalore. So please scan the QR code and you can download the document.
I think I'll just keep the slide open, but in the interest of time, I'll just hand it over to Arun Krishnan to take over the moderation.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Harshit. So let me just. Technology doesn't work when you want it to, right? Okay. So Aarti, to begin with. So can you explain more about the PES model? Okay, and I'm also interested in all of the speakers. I'm interested in how you think it can be scaled up, right? There is a demonstration which we all do, and then comes the scale up. So, and scale up also in the sense of how to make it commercially viable. Maybe you can touch upon that point as well. And also what needs to change in the enabling conditions for this to be implemented more widely, be it can be something to do with regulations, something to do with any other factors, right? So would love to hear from you on that.
Sure. Thank you for that. So I'm a little bit, I guess I'm a little bit of an odd one out because I mostly work in rural areas. We have a very small urban initiative where we build urban biodiversity hubs. We've built one near Pune. We have 3 coming up in Bangalore and then 1 near Chennai. But most of our work is in rural India. So I'll just quickly maybe share a little bit about how our model works, and then how if at all there are any synergies with the urban context. So essentially what we do is that we essentially onboard smallholder farmers in either agrarian communities or in and around tribal areas. We provide them everything they could possibly need to transition their land into more biodiverse agroforests. So we give them saplings, drip irrigation, organic fertilizer. If they want, we give them mulch. We give them Jeevamrut. The only thing that we require from them, and we used to do this completely for free, but our earlier data showed that that actually did not ensure higher survival rates. All we do is we ask them to cover 10% of the cost per acre. We onboard them, we do the plantation, we have pretty heavy post-plantation engagement as well in terms of horticulture support, etc. We then track the tree survival rates from year one. Based on the survival rate, so as long as they ensure at least 80 to 90% tree survival rates every year, we essentially give them a results-based payment. Now, the tricky part is it's kind of manageable to track survival rates of mature trees. You can use satellite data. It's next to impossible to do that with satellite data when the trees are like 1, 2, 3, or 4 years old. You're essentially looking at like a sapling that's just a couple of feet tall at most. Satellite data can't help us track that. And we tried QR coding our saplings, and we did it till like 5,000 trees, but once we reached like 20,000, it became impossible. So we also inadvertently started building our own tech. We didn't want to do that, but it was more out of necessity. So we essentially now use a mix of multispectral drones and a few open source Python packages like Deep Forest. We use Meta's Detectron 3, and recently we've also started using Meta's Dino V3. Essentially, they are computer vision libraries, and we've trained an open source algorithm to start identifying trees at an individual tree crown level. So it's a lot more scalable, and we get per tree estimation of survival rates, which essentially informs the results-based payment. We also then trained the model to also do biomass estimations. We've reached almost 85% accuracy rates with that. Our tree detection rates are 90%. So our false positive and false negative rates are pretty low. Going back to the model, they essentially get results-based payments up to 4 years. After the 4th year is when they start expecting some kind of income from the harvest. We stop the results-based payments from our side then they start making money. We've seen almost 3x to 4x increase in income, and that's not an exaggeration from what they were doing before, which is either almost nothing to maybe some lentils or soybeans. And the amount of input that's required to do agroforestry is significantly lower than any of the traditional farming, almost 70 to 80% reduction in terms of labor, water usage, etc. So that's kind of how our model works. After the 4th year is also when, if it's a carbon project, if the project is being funded by the voluntary carbon market, is also when the carbon finance starts kicking in. They essentially around 10, depending again on how the project is structured, around anywhere between 10 to 20% of the carbon revenue goes back to the communities. Then now it depends on the funder if they want to continue the results-based payment or do they want to create a community fund and pay communities that way. That's how our projects work. In terms of what we are looking at, in terms of maybe changes or regulatory systems change. I think one is just a very specific problem in the voluntary carbon markets. Our methodologies change every year depending on new research evidence that's coming in. So that makes it a little tricky to attract a lot of investment into these projects because, for example, to do a 10,000 hectare project, a 10,000 hectare agroforestry project, it costs $15 to $20 million. That's a pretty large sum for an investor to put in when you have all of these changes happening in the marketplace all the time. So there is that. The other problem we are facing a little bit is that we only work on private land because the land records are very clear. We would love to work on community land and forest land or government land, but we are a little worried that even if we get a sign off today saying, yeah, sure, you can use it, and the carbon credits, yeah, sure, that's owned by you and it will go to the communities, maybe a few years down the line, the government might be like, look, we are a little bit on short supply to meet our own NDCs, so we would like to take that back. So funders don't almost always fail any project with community land as part of the due diligence. Just one last point, and I'll stop there. The economics of PES, carbon-funded PES projects works well in rural India, right? Because we can aggregate. So a 10,000 hectare project, we essentially are working with 4,000 to 5,000 farmers, plenty of land available. We can do that. To do that in a urban or peri-urban context is very hard. Just to give an example about one of the urban biodiversity projects, right? Like we wanted to get a 10 to 20 acre land, a community land, anywhere in and around a city to do our biodiversity hub. It took us 6 months to find that piece of land where the local authorities were willing to give us a 10-year contract where the BD hub that we create will stand on that land for 10 years. And then hopefully, if it becomes an integral part of the community, we will renew the contract. So it's just very hard to do this in an urban and peri-urban context. There are other alternative financing mechanisms we can talk about, but carbon-funded PES, just the economics doesn't work right now.
Okay, so the impression I get is that in India for PES, aggregating farmers is a good idea across the country, right?
Yes.
Okay, very, very interesting. I wish to follow up, but the clock is ticking. So I will move on to Sudha Ramanji, who's the member secretary, Tamil Nadu State Planning Commission. So can you expand upon the financial model which was used for the management and rehabilitation of coastal habitats and biodiversity for climate change adaptation in Gulf of Mannar? Quite a mouthful, but it would be useful to understand this model. You've done a blending of funds, but I'm also wondering, will private funds be allowed as part of that blend? So maybe you can throw some light on that as well, and the enabling conditions for this model, how it can be replicated.
Thank you. I think that's an interesting question. Why? Because I started my career from Ramanathapuram. So as a trainee, I was working there. So Ramanathapuram is one of a very, very interesting place because of the oral diversity, the richness in the marine biodiversity what this place houses. And it's also equally vulnerable given the conditions of heavy sea erosion, sea level rise, and a lot of pressure because of the tourism too. And it has about 21 small islands which you can see there. And some of these islands are going missing. And this is very, very geopolitically significant area too. And it's definitely been very sensitive in terms of the geopolitics and also because of the fishermen community which has been living there, which is strongly dependent upon the fishing activities. So given this background, Ramanathapuram has been having an historical, evidences of how an eco-development activities could be taking place there. They established something called as GOMBERT, Gulf of Mannar Biodiversity Trust was established, which was heavily state funded. And why a trust has to be established at first place is any conservation project cannot be, depending on the state budget. One year you might have some good funding coming, next year there might not be coming, and this conservation has to be a round the clock activity despite of any budgetary allocation. So when you have a trust established, that gives you an opportunity to pool in resources, financial resources that could be utilized for community activities, for conservation activities, etc. So this model was working very, very well even before we started realizing, talking about the climate change and the finance models and all that. I think this government, if my memory goes right, I think it was established way back in 1980s itself. So that gives you the strong base in which how this particular area was exclusively working. This government covered the entire of the Gulf of Mannar area. And coming to this particular project, this project, is definitely an excellent one, wherein a lot of players came in pooling the funds. I do not have a lot of details about this project because I'm not working in the forest department at present, but I am with the State Planning Commission. But I'm aware that they have now established the Tea and Shore project, which is a World Bank funded project. And under the the Tea and Shore project, it's related to the coastal mission, and it is one of the four flagship missions. Tamil Nadu's climate governance is definitely an excellent model at a subnational level. Though it's subnational level, I believe that it's definitely a holistic model which any developing or any South, or any country with this economy could definitely be adopting, given, without compromising on development, how biodiversity and conservation could be given much of importance to ensure climate resilience. So the important flagship missions which the government introduced was Green Tamil Nadu mission, which aims in increasing significantly the green cover of the state. The second one is the wetland mission. Under the wetland mission, you must be aware that Tamil Nadu is a state which has the highest number of the Ramsar sites. And from one Ramsar site, it has improved to 20 as on date, just because of then, collated effort that came from different stakeholders. And adding on, what contributed to this was one of the exercise, and to take clue from what Aarti spoke about the PES. We did that an exhaustive study from the State Planning Commission, which is called the Economic Evaluation of the Important Wetlands. The phase one, we did 80 priority wetlands economic valuation was done, and this categorized the ecosystem services into four categories. I believe that most of you here must be aware of what are the four different types of the ecosystem services we have. We have got cultural services, provisioning services, recreational services, and I'm forgetting the last one. Sorry. Okay. So it categorizes into four categories, and it just depends upon the methodology is based upon how much the community is willing to pay to conserve this particular wetland, and that willingness to pay from the community is not just from the conservation angle in terms of biodiversity, in terms of water, in terms of tourism potential, and multiple other aspects. So that really gave us an interesting finding. And we also came to understand that how much of fund has to go in, therefore these services are continuing to be sustaining even without any kind of a challenge. This first phase we did about 80 wetlands economic valuation was done, and now we have completed 61 other wetlands. Why this 141 wetlands is based on the ISRO's wetland atlas, and we took the large scale wetlands. Some of these wetlands are again being recognized as Ramsar sites. So that was the work done by the State Planning Commission, which also supported the government to declare some of these sites as a Ramsar site. And this is the second flagship program. The third flagship program is the climate change mission, and the fourth one is the coastal mission. So these four flagship programs are being operated by a company called as Tamil Nadu Green Climate Company. It has been established under Section 8 in the Companies Act. This method of governance model, I think, is one classic example. It is the first of its kind in the country to come up with a company which oversees the operation or oversees the financial, assistance required to continue and to sustain these four flagship schemes. And today, this company, Green Climate Company, is being involved in lot of researches. It's been involved in engaging with multiple research, multiple financial agencies, multilateral agencies, adaptation fund, ADB, GIZ, GCFs, multiple agencies that been reached out, and you all very well understand that the government cannot be receiving these funds. It could be CSR, it could be any, you need an accredited agency which is required to receive these funds. And here the government took that lead role in establishing this agency at first place, which will definitely solve that, that particular gap which was previously existing. So the effort of the Environment, Forest, Climate Change Department led by Ms. Supriya Sahu, I think they did a phenomenal job in getting this established. And all other organizations, for example, Tamil Nadu also has one more model, which is the Infrastructure Development Board is being established. Tamil Nadu IDB is something which is also, I think, Aarti did mention about one project in Anali. It is also taking care of looking into you did mention about the CPPF facility. This particular requirement of supporting the government departments in taking up climate resilience is being done by the IDB itself, as well as by, we also have one more organization called TUFISL, exclusively for urban financing, urban infrastructures. So these organizations are SPVs that's been established to, handhold and to cater to the requirements of the departments in taking up these resilience initiatives. It could be by means of resilience, it's both the adaptation as well as the mitigation works, which I'm talking about. And I think this, coming back to this particular project, it has been a significant results have come out. And as I said, it's definitely not, generally what happens is that when you have a project, all of what to tell, you do not have a continuity or the sustenance after it. But when you have a mission and when you have a set of the KPIs that's been defined, it becomes a mandate. Even after the funding assistance stops, what is the sustainable way in which the outcome is being measured, and these initiatives are largely scaled up. So I think that way, definitely Tamil Nadu has excellent model. And I'm not sure if I'm going to have the second round, but then I just thought I should definitely be mentioning on the topic of urban resilience. So I'll just take another 1 minute to quickly summarize. Chennai recently came up with the municipal bond, which was listed in the NSE. That was the first of and step what Chennai has taken. And now they are again coming, and this particular listing in the NSE through municipal bonds was focused for climate resilience, exclusively for the flood related works. And you have the stormwater, the flood resilience activities exclusively for that. And recently in June, they came up with green bonds. These particular things are exclusively for the biomining activities, because today urban and peri-urban areas face a large threat of legacy waste. And I'm not here to debate if the biomining is the right way to go forward. I'm not entering into that, but still multiple options are being tried, and multiple solutions are being tried at different scale. So this green bond is being established exclusively for the waste management purposes, in which a lot of initiatives are taking place. And secondly, on Chennai, the OSR is very good. The in terms of tax, they use this gamification is being used exclusively for property taxes. GIS based property tax collection has been yielding a significant result, helping the GCC in using this model to raise a lot of revenue, which again gets back into the pool for the urban resilience activities. And also, one other thing I would like to tell is Tamil Nadu was the first state to declare heat as a disaster. So declaring something as a disaster gives us an opportunity to utilize the disaster relief funds. So this is again one opportunity wherein an importance when you have about when you notify something as a disaster, there is a huge amount of fund available under the disaster relief fund, which gives you an opportunity to leverage these funds to execute some of the projects. And recently, I happened to attend a 3 days event in Bangkok, which was done by UNDP exclusively on climate finance, exclusively for Asia Pacific. And that was really very highlighting, it opened up a lot of, opportunities and avenues in which the funds could be leveraged. The adaptation fund is a huge fund. Okay, NABARD has an exclusive adaptation fund in place, and a lot of urban, peri-urban, utilization projects is definitely possible. And we have got UNCDF is also having an climate finance network fund is available. FCDO, the UK is coming up with a lot of funding assistance, and the role what the State Planning Commission is providing to these government departments is to take up researchers, take up studies, evaluations, to build evidences and to build data. Therefore, with the limited financial, uh, uh, the resources available, where you have to use it is something very critical. You cannot spread it out to make it very thin across a city like Chennai, which is very large. So we are supporting the departments in taking up vulnerability hotspots are being mapped. We are using GIS based, analysis intensively, and taking up a lot of vulnerability assessments to support these departments to rope in, resources or to focus their initiatives in those areas where there is an actual requirement. So I think it was quite, an lengthy talk, but I think it must be
No, no,
helpful.
I mean,
Thank you.
that was quite useful. And it's also, I think Tamil Nadu is one of the pioneering states when it comes to this really channeling finance into climate, right? So it's quite interesting to know the various projects and initiatives happening there. Uh, I mean, now I want to move on to Dulari Parmar, who's the project lead, Climate Justice, Youth for Unity, and Voluntary Action. So interesting model, crowdfunding. I mean, you see a lot of crowdfunding growing in India, mostly for, people appealing for health and so on, right? But you've done this for greening in vulnerable neighborhoods across Mumbai. So can you talk about the project and the model? But also, again, crowdfunding, how do you make it scalable?
Thanks so much for that question. For those who all don't know about Yuba, I'll just briefly introduce us. We are Youth for Unity and Voluntary Action. We have been here for the past 41 years working with the marginalized communities across different states in India. But largely our climate work is currently in Maharashtra and Assam. I'm coming from a vantage point of communities, of marginalized communities who live in bastis, especially women and young people. So, the context I would like to set is that most of our cities, more than 70% or 60% of our cities are bastis, are informal settlements. And there are multiple dynamics when it comes to doing any form of work in bastis, be it habitat related, labor related, youth rights related, or climate. And I'm largely talking about these very complex dynamics in which bastis exist. There are multiple stakeholders with multiple priorities. And I would like to use a term called messiness. There's a lot of messiness when you work with the urban poor communities, with different different levels of politics. I'll come more to that, but due to all these challenges and especially land being central to a lot of these challenges, um, adaptation and coping is something that can be done locally. However, mitigation is something that's very far beyond the basti, and that needs a bigger role and bigger scale. So, in terms of talking about crowdfunding and where all this came from, it actually really stemmed from Mumbai Climate Action Plan, where WRI was leading that up, and then we had a conversation on how can we extend the Mumbai Climate Action Plan to the vulnerable neighborhoods in terms of greening spaces in the communities. So we started with Lullaby Compound, which is a rehabilitation and resettlement colony. You can imagine matchstick house buildings right next to each other with very less or no airflow and natural light coming into the buildings. So in this context, the open spaces that exist within these colonies become very critical because they are the only spaces of respite in these communities. We had started with a 2,000 square meter, which is a fairly small area for nature-based solutions, and we overlapped this with placemaking. So previously the space were completely concretized to minimize the maintenance, and it was dumped with a lot of garbage and dotted with drug abusers and youth at risk. So in terms of intervention, we looked at locally how can nature-based solution act as an enabler for people to come into this space, but also for heat and flood prevention in these areas. I would like to highlight some challenges that we came across is multiple permissions, like Aati was pointing out, that in urban areas, land, since it's so central to any climate action or any action that you take, the permissions for these locations was central to, doing any form of action in that area. Beyond that, when, with support of WRI, MMRDA, and support from the community, we were able to get permissions. We then implemented locally nature-based solutions in terms of tree plantation. Again, this was a long-term process. Took around 18 months to really implement this. But I would like to highlight the importance of slow capital, which invests not only in the actual implementation of the project, but also enabling structures for it. So not only tree plantations, but enabling community to become a part of that process. So how can we do co-designing with the community to highlight, different groups had different priorities in the community. For men, they wanted gym and, compounded space, whereas women and children wanted a seating spaces and shaded areas. So how do we negotiate these very different priorities within the community was important aspect of this process. And now 2 years, so I think 3 years since this is implemented, it is community owned. People are not only, keeping it, but maintaining it, and we're expanding this. So now coming to the crowdfunding aspect of it, after the implementation of that process, we initiated Chalo Basti Badle Abhiyan, which is basically a locally led process of inviting external donors like all of us and seeing how people are reacting to really investing in climate solutions. This was important because first is communities trust us and trust Yuva as an organization. But beyond that, their idea of making a change was possible. That is basically what Chalu Basti talked about, how our tangible outcomes and implementation can be done through local funding, crowdfunding. And then this again emerged from deep connect with people. For donors, why was this very fun and fancy? Because it's focused on community's agency. So through the campaign, we talked about how community will be leading the process as opposed to some external expert coming and talking about climate action. Second is strong co-design aspects. We talked about how co-designing with women group, with youth group, with adult group, with federation groups, and how their priorities can be matched to lead towards implementation. Second is again money is going into a tangible aspect where the donor, whoever even spends 500 rupees, can know that my 500 rupees is getting spent here and how it can lead to change for certain people in the community. And then beyond that, it's a long term process which has proof of work that you can actually walk down to that location to see how is my money being implemented and used for implementation. So through the Chalo Basti Badle Abhiyan, we were able to expand to 3 different locations. One in Panvel, one near the existing site in Lalubai compound, and last one in Navi Mumbai in a school. Um, to highlight my last few points is this future pathways for crowdfunding. and I have that small cake on the top of my screen, is to highlight that crowdfunding is that cherry on the top. It's quite literally that small and how impactful in terms of the aesthetic of the cake, but the base of it, the cake, is where a lot of meat exists, and without that very strong cake and investment in adaptations through global and international funding, through city level funding, the cherry will not make sense. You'll not be able to enjoy the cherry. So I'd like to stop here saying that crowdfunding is important, but it cannot be sustainable if we only depend on crowdfunding. It's a channel, it's a mode to invest, to get invested citizens invest in climate funding. However, it can only expand if organizations like WRI and bigger think tanks also support organizations like us working in and with the informal communities to build that support from the ground, and beyond crowdfunding look at more funding opportunities which are corporate, CSR and international funding. Thanks.
Yes, I think, like you said, very nice analogy, cherry on top of the cake. But I was also wondering whether, a lot of our municipal issues can be solved by, or at least some of it can be solved by crowdfunding. If you have a pothole outside your housing complex, maybe the housing complex people can pool fund together and get it repaired and so on. The legality of that also has to be seen anyways. Next, I will move on to Anant Tiwari, who's the Deputy Vice President, Climate Risk Adaptation and Insurance in KM Dastur, Reinsurance Brokers. Please talk about this model from Mexico for coral reef protection and how it can be applied to India. I mean, it may not be in coral reef, it can be in other areas.
Thanks, Arun. So, I'll first start by drawing a parallel between Mexico and India, and then translating how this Mexican experiment, a successful one, is now being replicated in India or can be replicated in India, and then maybe just take a couple of minutes to explain how it can be done. So, in a nutshell, Reef, the parametric cover that was done, essentially.
If I sum it up in one line, it is the use of a public-private partnership model to fund the premium of a parametric cover whose claims are then used for climate change adaptation. So if you have a calamity, there is a public-private trust which is there, which is paying for the premium of a cover. And when there is a calamity, you have a payout, which can then be used for adaptation activities. And we keep adaptation activities open because there can be a range of adaptation activities. It could be natural resource conservation, as in this case, the conservation of the reefs. But then it could also be other things, right? So that's the success of the model, as in having been able to deploy a PPP model to fund the insurance premium of a parametric cover and then using its payouts for climate change adaptation. Now, how can it be done in a setting like India? Is first we have to appreciate that we have to identify a community and a problem that the community is facing. That is where it becomes important that we do that. The journey always starts with a diagnostic, right? Whenever we have a community that is facing a climate problem, the next thing that we have to do is to understand what is the kind of problem the community is facing, and can that problem be solved by an instrument like a parametric insurance cover. Every time, in all cases, an insurance will not be a solution. Maybe they will need something like health aid, which is not possible to a health cover, or maybe they need legal and psychological assistance in times of calamities. It should not be provided by an insurance cover. So once we have identified the community, we have to identify what is the challenge that they face in the wake of a calamity, and can that be resolved by parametric insurance. If it can be, then the next step is to understand whether a PPP model is possible in this case or not. So our understanding has been that wherever we are working with communities that are part of a value chain, a PPP model is possible. What I mean is, wherever we are working with workers of some kind, maybe formal, maybe informal, farmers, they are a part of a certain value chain which can at some point pitch in to drive the premium for these communities, provided they are able to realize that that affects their balance sheets as well. And of course, the government can come from the social angle because they anyways have an imperative to serve the communities which are being invested, right? So once that understanding is there, then the next very important step is, and this is where the role of civil society and development partners comes in, is to do a small pilot. Because wherever you go, and we have faced this multiple times, wherever you go, the first question that you are asked is, do you have proof of concept? That is being done somewhere. Last year we designed a cover based on AQI for migrant laborers in Delhi itself. Now AQI has never been used as a parameter anywhere in the world. So even the insurers we went to, and these were all the big insurers and reinsurers, the first question was, this is not being done. So how do we take this? The data is only of 7 years. Parametric curves essentially are based on trend analysis of data spanning at least 25 to 30 years. And AQI was there only since 2017 again. So we did not have data. Still we were able to explain it to them that see, this is how it's been moving, this is how it is probably going to move, there were narratives, there was modeling, actuarial reward and all of that. I'm not going into the details. But the point is, at some point, civil society and development partners have to talk together to do a small pilot, no matter how small it is, to be able to demonstrate that something of this kind can work. It can actually go off this. Once that is there, it must have happened in this program also. It is what is happening now in the AQI and the recent heat stress program that we did with us also. Once you are able to lift a pilot, then that is what then generates interest in the value chain piece. Like, I'm quoting statistics, and $9 billion in India alone are lost every year due to productivity losses related to heat and monsoon at the worker. Now, who is losing this $9 billion? It is the construction companies, it is the heavy industries, it is the big platform, the hoteling industry, and whatnot. So once these value chain players understand that this cover actually helps to allay the livelihood concerns of these workers, it is able to free up their agency so that they are able to work with more confidence. It is able to give them the hospital relief where they need it the most. And that is how our balance sheets and PNS are actually getting saved. Once that realization is there, it is now that we have started interest pouring in from industry partners. And of course, the government would eventually come in, so this is a part of their mandate, right? So, in a nutshell, we first have to do a very strong diagnostic to understand whether the community is facing a challenge, what that challenge is a parametric insurance the right kind of solution? If it is, the next thing is to do a small pilot, and if the pilot can lift off, you will see the interest from the scientific players, provided the communities are part of the value chain. Yeah. I have also been asked to speak about the Nagaland experience. Do we have time for that?
Okay, so I thought we could do a quick second round.
Yeah, sure.
In which you can talk about it. Great. Thank you. So to me, it looks like one data. Okay, historical data, the more data you have, the better for designing the parametric insurance and demonstration, doing pilots and so on, which probably governments and civil society organizations can. Okay, great. Moving on to Nilesh, who's the head of Climate Projects Preparation Facility, CPPF in NIA. So, what are the strategies for cities can adopt so that they can identify climate adaptation?
I'll try to lead the answer to that. So, firstly, I think just some principal points around what blended finance is in simple terms, right? Because there's a lot of financial jargon that's used. The simplest way of thinking about it is more, cheaper, and better. So the more means basically leveraging public capital to get commercial capital. Also making that capital's cost of capital less, because many SMEs still are paying too much for it, and the accountability, which is the reference, right? Which is making more results based. Often it's thought of as just the dance between philanthropic and private capital, which is the third element, which is all what we talked about here, which is the project management. Which is a big challenge in project preparation facilities and all that. So there's also an operational component to it. It's not just about making philanthropic and commercial capital dance. There also has to be a revenue model or a balance sheet. So things which are purely philanthropic, which is no possibility for payouts, it won't work. So you have to basically figure out how do you use the full capital stack. Something like crowdfunding, as you said, could be a charity. The government funding, or DFI funding is very institutional. But how do you crowd in commercial private capital? So I think there's three challenges that I wanted to share, which are cutting across everything we've spoken about. Risk sharing, localization, and transparency. And I'll walk through what each of those are. Risk sharing is often that philanthropists are reluctant to participate in these blended finance transactions because they feel it's a subsidy to the private sector. So there's this notion of minimum concessionality. How do you justify the minimum concessionality in order to bring in the private capital and not subsidize the private capital? Global foundations are often interested in doing it. Indian foundations, it hasn't even started. So that's a very important concept. And this was talked about also in Spain, the 15th, by our finance minister. And the Indian government is also very this. Localization is interesting, right? Because why are we only relying on foreign philanthropy, foreign capital, foreign DFIs? There's a lot of wealth creation in India. Indian nationalized Indian foundations are very, very participate. That has to change. The government talks about localization, but in order to do that, let's be honest, we have to unlock some regulatory levers. India doesn't have PRI law, program-related investments. It's difficult to blend for-profit and not-for-profit capital, but there are ways of doing that. There's importance of increasing the domestic tax base, the revenue base. The people will talk about one of the projects that the India Foreign International-Based Solutions, which WRI, CPI, and CW working on, talks about some of those things, right? So that I was mentioning a lot of the things that pioneering states and Tamil Nadu was doing. One of the examples that I think, was foundation was the Tamil Nadu water examination project, which was set up way back in 2002 or something. It's a pooled bond issuance. Because an individual municipality may not be able to do a funding for a particular water examination project, this pooled bond thing can do it. The large DFIs like the Erskine USAID and KFW supported that. So you need domestic capital, all of these sources. Now certain states like Karnataka, like Goa, like West Bengal are translating their state action plans into state planning finance facilities. So that's the second point. Get domestic capital. And the third is there's still very less data and transaction templates on this. Every single transaction is bespoke. Institutions like Convergence have a database of different blended finance transactions, but they will not share with you the pricing or the actual data, which is again why initiatives like this are so helpful for India for climate-based solutions. Anand mentioned about, let's say, parametric insurance, right? How that can scale. In India, many of you will be familiar that SEMA has been doing work on this. Now we're translating that into a fund, called livelihood funding fund. So you have to sort of get the data so that these things can be scaled. And the final point I'll make on the capital stack, which applies to a lot of the projects here, is think of it this way: how do they work together? And particularly what our team mentioned about the work of our farmers for forests. Carbon credits, which a lot of us talk about in climate finance, are not investment; they're a revenue stream which come in the future. Blended finance is a sort of investment, it's concessional capital. So think about the life cycle of the project. You start with a grant, which is needed for the project preparation facility, for the design of the project. Then you can have outcome-based payments for initial intermediate results. And let's not be obsessed about all of the outcomes. It's okay if it's outputs, number of trees planted, or number of people trained, or whatever. Then the concessional capital comes in, because there has to be some revenue model for debt. And each of these needs the other. The blended capital doesn't want to come in because it's like, how will I get my future payout? You'll get it from the carbon credits, which will eventually come in the future. The carbon credits won't come in because those will make the initial investment. So these different instruments in the financial stack have to be packaged together. And needless to say, with all the key aspects of credible NRDs and the sharing of co-benefits, so the quality of the credit is what matters. So I think if we can look at this in terms of overall capital stack, figure out what instrument is applicable when, and then evangelize this with Indian foundations, as well as the government to get the right regulations in place, then these models that you've spoken about, food funding, EPS, parametric insurance, all of these things are growing in scale. So again, a lot of credit to you guys at WRI and the other ecosystem builders for bringing all of these conversations together. Yeah, I think the bespoke nature of these transactions, that's a huge stumbling block. You try to set up, for example, credit guarantees, okay, and folks are not very clear, what is the jurisdiction, how should it function, and so on, right? And that takes a lot of time and effort, and maybe people are even reluctant to participate in such transactions because the regulatory clarity is not, right? So that is something I think which we all would like to see more clarity on. But yeah, I'll move on to Swati. Swati Pillai is my chief analyst at World Bank and it's WRI. With the help of development banks, could you tell us about the ways cities can access more funding from the state and center for climate adaptation, and what is needed to promote?
My intervention. Yeah. So my intervention today will attempt largely focuses on a point that was mentioned by one of the panelists in the debate today, which is on the need for local level ownership on infrastructure management and planning. But before I go into it, I'll just set the context. So in India, when we have disaster and climate risk, mounting disaster and climate risk happening, we're looking at huge asset losses, service disruption, which kind of further widens the infrastructure gap, right? So the risk for a country that's facing urban population kind of double by 2050 is actually looking at urbanization which is unmatched, pretty haphazard, and has to face a planning process which is nearly not there, and management systems that are absent. So the question on how can cities increase funding from states on climate change adaptation, one easy way, not just easy, one very obvious way is through strengthening policies and fiscal transfers, largely on climate-linked transfers and performance-based returns, which will then incentivize local government. I'll use an example here, which is from a World Bank population in Kerala. 2018 was when the state of Kerala faced one of its worst flooding events. It was one in 100-year event, saw massive losses, property, lives, infrastructure, but that was not it. It was followed by a similar event in 2019, 2020, 2021. That was exactly when the state decided that the development model, the paradigm of development needed to shift. It needed to be inclusive of it. Everyone's been talking about it, but the adoption of it was pretty not there. With that intent, and with the intent of kind of introducing a transversal system of resilience at institutional policy level, also ensuring that these kind of go down and for those sectors that are economically relevant for the state, you ensure that resilience is in there. That's where World Bank came in with the first level of policy basis, which was immediately after the 2018 flood in 2019, the 250 million policy support, followed by an operational support which went a little more sector specific in 2021. That was 125 million, which was also co-financed by AIIB, again 125 million, and AFP with 100 million. So what happens is, the second part of your question on how do development NDPs help, they pool in additional resources, which kind of is an add-on to how much the state can do it, right? So the intent of this operation in 2021 was to have key sectors, economic sectors in the state, have policy changes that embed resilience, right? And one of the components was to ensure that local level planning is informed by resilience. How did the state go about it? The state went about it by developing and sanctioning risk-informed master plans, by ensuring that the local action plan and adaptation and the local DRM plans, they have, when the local governments make those plans, they have information, climate data that's been downscaled at that level. So that whatever information put in, whatever infrastructure plans, annual plans that they make, and if they're planning any data activity, they are informed of contextualized climate risk. How did they go about it? They developed a tool called the Recap tool, which is a disaster risk management and climate action tracker. The intent of the tool was to A, help local governments at Panchayat and at municipality level to be able to identify if you're making a one-year plan, how do you ensure that those are climate informed? How much of those are climate adaptation projects, mitigation projects, conservation projects, and how much money are you allocating? So based on these two parameters, a score gets assigned to a local body. If your score is 30% and above, you get a 60% of a performance-based grant that the LSTD would have kept separate. You go beyond 30%, let's say between 31 to 70%. Beyond the 60% of this performance-based grant, you also get an additional 18%. So that in a way incentivizes local governments to kind of ensure that the intervention that you're putting in and choosing it for that year is inclusive of resilience parameters, will kind of serve the purpose when those climate risks face your particular locality. Yeah, so that's the incentivization part and part of the performance-based plan that I've talked about. And Kerala did it very inclusively. Ensure that communities are involved in the planning process. Ensure that every different departments conducive are involved in the planning process. I was the second part of the question.
Okay, so the second part is to crowd in philanthropic concession and finance for urban adaptation. But I think maybe the World Bank or Development Banks are not best placed to do the crowding research because.
No, true. They are, in the sense that once you ensure, okay, so why don't projects at local level get the private sector based funding as is desired, right? Someone mentioned, one of our panelists mentioned, because the regulatory norms are not in place. They don't have the policies in place. They don't give enough, confidence to the private sector to come and approve it. That's exactly where the LED is coming. Those policy and regulatory frameworks, you help the state build it, you help the state strengthen it. And that kind of allows and gives the largest confidence to the investors to come and approve it. And that's exactly what the performance-based incentive will do. It allows local governments to identify and build capacity to understand what exactly is the kind of investment looking at, and therefore build a pipeline in future. And that was a point mentioned by Nilesh on climate screening itself. It's a key part of the performance-based incentive. You screen your projects based on the vulnerabilities that area faces.
Yeah. No, I think the capital which development banks provide is very enough, but also the changes in policy, etc., which World Bank is able to drive, that is also extremely important. I also wonder, whether the outcomes might be different for a better governed state versus a less governed state, but that's a discussion for another day. But thank you. Now, moving on to Linda Denny, Head of Partnerships, LED Accelerator, and Consultant for Wipro Foundation. Tell us about ESG and CSR, how it is involved to support climate adaptation and resilience projects, and also, the focus on maybe you can talk about the blending of finance as well, right? Is there some challenge in doing that, and also the changes that are required to blend non-profit versus for-profit funds?
Sure, thank you. Most time we have. Sure, we start.
I'm not going to limit because everybody is spoken their heart out, so please.
Well, I'll tell you what others have spoken and add to what so this on the ESG part, because I'm just trying to use some ESG as CSR. ESG would typically see what's happening in business operations, and CSR we want to do beyond your operational boundary. And I think there are a lot of examples of companies trying to leverage ESG funding for impact. Three examples of urban environment, right? Companies can look at reducing scope 3 footprint. Typically look at urban mobility projects supporting, for example, carpooling or even mobility using cycling. These are things that companies are doing. It was happening much before pre-COVID, but now I think it's slow uptake of some of these projects. Second, could be urban biodiversity projects. Their own campuses, how they look at biodiversity, right? Because you can create an urban biodiversity hotspot in your own campus. There are a lot of microclimate improvements for your campus, not in the surrounding area. And if you look at corporate campuses, they have large land parcels. IT companies have probably 50, 60 acres campuses. And they could be, biodiversity hotspots in terms of education, the community, and also engaging the employees and the community around. So those are one kind of something you have to look at from the ESG perspective. The other point is typically also procurement. That's a huge factor. How we look at procurement enabling local businesses, right? For example, can procurement enable supporting local artisans for your products? It could be anything. It could be interior design. It could be furniture for your office spaces. Many of these things are alike to what you can do. For example, we did a small project with one company where we are saying how do you increase the uptake of recycling in your communities. So basically, the company is supporting something like 40 repair melas or repair cafes in the neighborhood. So we essentially get a local carpenter, plumber, electrician, cobbler, and a carpenter, and we have a mela in a community, and they do all the repair activities. Both they do it, also we have DIY activities. This way of enabling communities to come together to do repair events. That's the kind of ESG as more of using operational model to support some of these projects. On the CSR side, I think what I can see is clearly in the urban context, right? I think there is a shortage of practical projects. That is, companies see that there is not much happening for them to invest in urban because CSR unfortunately looks at projectized way of supporting projects. Because CSR law requires to support projects. Not much funding goes to leverage or basically how do you kind of provide risk capital for one project. For example, the Urban project essentially where we supported ADR preparation. Typically, that's not supported by companies. Right? So how do you kind of create an ecosystem of that? While I think the repair could be whatever cherry or doing the cherry. But the bulk of the work is still to be done. The government is to issue funding. So how do you get a project funding model where a company can actually provide support in getting stakeholders together? For example, somebody like WRA comes with a project idea, you comes with a community model, and corporate comes with a funding for the repair preparation and stakeholder engagement part. So then once is done, then you have to engage with the government to fund that whole project. So these examples need to be integrated more in urban areas. That's one example. Other thing that we have done is also it's the government also very complex. There are a lot of stakeholders, a lot of handshakes, and generally, if you look at companies, there is you could say a lack of trust in collaboration. Generally, right? Look to corporates come together to do a project, and also corporate does not directly over the government. The corporate only goes to the NGO or a community organization. So how do you kind of build that trust in the system? So I think you need to create platforms for that, where you actually get ideas together to create such projects. So one way is actually created in Bangalore for the Bangalore Sustainability Forum, which is existing for the last 4 years. It's a collaborative platform of various organizations, there is academic organization, legal organizations, community organizations, and where ideas actually come together to deliberate what we can do at the city level. So while we do not directly implement projects at scale, because the funding is limited, but we get people to come together and deliberate ideas and solutions of what we can do right, at the city level. So in the last, I would say 3 years, we've done about 40 projects, small grants. The grant will be very small, 5 lakhs, 10 lakhs, but we enable that catalytic growth. Either you create an educational program for schools on rainwater harvesting, or a biology booklet for parks in Bangalore, or you small pilot on airport measurement software. These are enabling factors. Once that is done, then we leverage the funding from government and other stakeholders. That's one thing. The other thing is that also the funding from corporates has certain typology. Right? So most corporates will fund education, health, or they would say you want to go to schools. These are typical areas of intervention. So how do you create a common language for supporting such urban adaptation or resilience projects? So I think it's also good to have a new definition of, for example, urban resilience. We call it livability, and that's what I work in livability. So livability is the most wider term. Everyone wants to make their places livable, which is better air, better food to eat, good health in the neighborhood. Social aspects. Livability is a much broader agenda, and that can be a useful factor to enable companies and communities to work on such projects. Just like the CDPO project, what NUI has. You need to have more such examples. For example, we're talking about a neighborhood improvement district plan. So how can local communities or local businesses in a neighborhood support funding in that area? Just like MySR, we get people supporting individuals contribute for neighborhood improvement. Local businesses can contribute to neighborhood improvement also. We have some project like that in Bangalore for neighborhood improvement district. Where local businesses in an area contribute to local improvement. That could be a park, could be a improvement of a road upkeep, or even park maintenance, or even lake rejuvenation. So how can a local business to contribute? These models don't exist. They can be created. So that's few of the examples. I think clearly a lot of things can be done by leveraging various platforms. Like I said, the idea was when we did the urban project, we clearly said that we can't do infrastructure support, but we can enable this whole project to be to a certain level and post that it over the government to get their funding. So that's what is happening, and there are a bunch of projects like that. We work in Devanahalli, outskirts of Bangalore, where the project was essentially to look at a model of using treated wastewater for and treat the water, rejuvenate the aquifer, and then use the water for supplying to the town municipal corporation. There also the work for essentially DPR and the initial assessment was the work was in the town municipal concept. They funded the project. So how do you look at such examples of supporting leveraging the funding of corporates to create larger impactful projects? Example I want.
Thank you. My son sounds like Rav from me. But yeah, thank you very much. Thank you to all the speakers. Very nice discussion. I invite Laila Sura, Program Director for Strategic Partnerships, to say a few words.
I was asked. I was asked to provide closing remarks, and I feel like that's quite a challenge because the conversation here is so rich and so many different perspectives. But again, I'll just start with what Jayo did and emphasizing that the Indian cities are on the front lines of these climate risks. But we learned in this discussion how cities are also on the front lines of the solutions. We heard about how urban population India is supposed to double in the next 25 years. Shops are intensifying, and large investments are needed in green urban infrastructure. But public budgets alone aren't sufficient. I really like the point that Karti spoke about, that the difference between mobilizing finance versus the revenue streams to ultimately pay for the project. And so, in many cases, urban adaptation infrastructure fundamentally relies on public budgets, public revenue, even if the financing comes from MPDs or international finance. And so, for this reason, it's critical that all of these projects build public support and the political will to finance adaptation and resilience. And so, we've heard about these four great examples of innovative ways to mobilize additional capital. RT spoke about Maharashtra's carbon credits systems and philanthropic support. How they were combined to help farmers restore land and increase biodiversity while also tripling farmers' incomes. Incredible. We heard from Sudha about the work in Tamil and where pooled state, central, and international funds were used to restore coastal ecosystems, protect livelihoods for fishermen, and enhance biodiversity. And we heard from Dulari about how her organization is transforming his spaces in Mumbai and converting them into safe, green, inclusive, climate reasonable hubs. And how the crowdfunding platform that we launched was really just a cherry on the cake. And I think we all really took to that analogy, and that fundamentally philanthropic funding was critical to making the cake and proving out the idea. But that crowdfunding has allowed for expanding into other areas. And then finally, we heard about the parametric insurance in Mexico, and fundamentally about creating the PPP to mobilize funds from both government foundations as well as the private sector, the hotel operators, property owners, to create this insurance fund, and how it unlocked payments within days after a hurricane, allowing for its rapid restoration and protecting tourism and dependent economies. And I also appreciated how you emphasized the need for doing pilots to demonstrate success, and that generates interest across the value chain, and that's critical to helping to scale these models. So a key part of the discussion, really, that you tried to engender after these great examples were presented was focused on how to scale these solutions. And in opening, Shield, you mentioned the conference proceedings for unlocking private finance for climate action, but you didn't actually go through the results. But I actually read the paper, so I encourage everyone to read the paper. And I just want to pull out a few facts from the paper for some key components in addition to what we heard around the table for scaling impact. So first was city-driven climate action plans to identify priority projects, and then these city action cells to bring together critical stakeholders to actually make these projects move forward are really important. And then secondly, the climate and project preparation facility, how that's helping to take some of these ideas and make them bankable and make them a reality. And then finally, CSR investments and additional finance from entities and other institutions are helping to finance these solutions and to create these clear examples of wins that then other financiers and government can help to scale. And so just in conclusion, I'd like to maybe finish with three final thoughts. First is that we should scale what works, that taking these successful, innovative examples and figuring out how to replicate them back to mainstream them across Indian cities and even globally are really important. Secondly is to invest in the right portfolio of projects. And so prioritizing projects that have this triple benefit of social impact, corporate value, and climate resilience helps to bring to life that we can have these successful wins and to attract financing for longer-term results. And then finally, communicate to inspire that we need to share these success stories with leaders, investors, philanthropists, and the public to help build momentum, strengthen trust, to unlock the investment for adaptation